If you're in the mood for dark and scary with a touch of irony, there's nothing better than to sit back and watch your favorite stories on the big screen or even the little screen. Today, we're going to talk about Netflix's Fall of the House of Usher by Mike Flanagan. But how does it compare to the original stories it represents? What are the Easter eggs? Let's look at each episode by title and see how it shapes up to the story written by the master of macabre himself, Edgar Allan Poe.
I'm not talking about that bull. I'm talking about the real stuff, what you get on victory, and the only thing that saves this family is publicly executing the informant.
The interesting thing is with the animals. Test animals. It's not the number of dying animals, that's market norm, like you said. The problem is with the livestock count.
What do you mean?
I mean the numbers don't work. There's animals missing.
Go on.
Episode 3 is titled The Murders in the Rue Morgue. In this episode, we begin with the aftermath of Perry's party. The death and disaster that occurred are first examined by Arthur Gordon Pym, the well-connected family attorney. Pym is the name of Poe's only full-length novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, written in 1838. Upon examining the piles of corpses from the acid rain that melted the partygoers, Pym hears a noise. There is a survivor. It is Morella, the wife of Roderick Usher's eldest child, Frederick. The name Morella is a short story by Poe about a woman who dies and is reincarnated in the body of her daughter. There are lots of Easter eggs in here related to Poe, the first being when Pym enters the warehouse. Pym is wearing an N95 mask, reminding us of imagery of plague masks worn by the physicians of the day. Perry's demise is from the Mask of the Red Death, a story about hiding from a plague symbolic of the Black Death in the 14th century. When Verna shows her driver's license, we can see that her last name is Clem. Poe's mother-in-law had the same last name. Maria Clem was married to Poe's grandfather, David Poe, who was a hero in the Revolutionary War of the United States. Maria, whose nickname was Muddy, would take in Poe when he had nowhere else to stay. Her and Poe's wife Virginia would stay together in whichever city they moved to, living in Philadelphia, New York City, and Baltimore. There's a mention of cutting up a body and hiding it, a clear reference to the Telltale Heart. On the same driver's license, we can see that Verna's address is 1849 Reynolds Street. In 1849, Poe was found on the streets of Baltimore in someone else's clothes. He was taken to the hospital where he would repeat the name Reynolds over and over again. 3 days later, he passed away. There's the mention of the drug Monty.
What the f*** is Monty?
A street-engineered derivative of the Usher's drug creation, Ligadone. Monty is referring to Amontillado, the sherry that is the title of Poe's short story, The Cask of Amontillado. A young Roderick mentions Metzer, a play on Poe's story, Metzengerstein. Leo, whose full name is Napoleon, is Usher's middle child. His name comes from Poe's story, The Spectacles, from the character with the same name. The goat horns tattoo on his neck draw the impression of a reference to Never Bet the Devil Your Head, a comedy written by Poe. During conversations between Roderick and Griswold, there are several references to walls and bricks.
We are a unit. This isn't just about sticking together. This is about forming a wall.
That family firewall you've always talked about's being dismantled, one brick at a time.
This is not about sticking together. It's about forming a wall.
In The Cask of Amontillado, the story's antagonist is bricked up inside of a wall while still alive. There are a few references to Poe's story The Black Cat as well, the mentioning of a cat named Pluto and the subsequent murder of the animal. In the original story by Poe, a woman named Camille and her mother Madame l'Espanaye are brutally murdered. Camille's body was found mutilated and shoved up a chimney. The strength it would take to do such a thing is monumental, and the murderer must be extraordinary. To make matters more mysterious, the doors and windows were all locked from the inside with no sign of forced entry. Her mother was found in a courtyard nearby the building with her throat slashed and severely beaten. When they attempted to move the body, her head fell off. The police arrest Adolphe Lebon as the primary suspect. A friend of Adolphe's, C. Auguste Pin, takes note of his arrest and takes action to exonerate his friend. This was the first story like this, where a detective is the central character of the plot. Most people would agree that Edgar Allan Poe invented the detective genre, and anytime you see shows like Law & Order, CSI, or even Scooby-Doo, you are seeing the story structure that Poe created. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once said, "There would be no detective story without Edgar Allan Poe." Dupin used deductive reasoning to solve mysteries, a method the series' character also employs. Poe called this process ratiocination, and it was through this method that Dupin was able to solve the crime.
We need to talk, Freddy.
What the happened? Where was she? What is happening?
We need to talk because when people ask, there are some things you absolutely cannot say.
The Usher family is dealing with the loss of their youngest member, Perry. In an odd way, they are trying to objectively assess the situation, a form of Poe's ratiocination. The remaining family gathers and rationalizes what to do next. With Camille taking the lead, they decide to paint Perry as a saint, a victim of a terrible accident. Meanwhile, Camille continues her investigation into Victorine, her half-sister, and her project of developing a life-saving heart device. Victorine is conducting experiments on apes, surgically implanting the device around the heart and recording the results of survivors versus casualties. Camille believes that her sister is working as an informant against the family and wishes to discover it. In the course of looking for the facts, her assistants uncover a discrepancy in numbers. Victorine is falsifying the numbers of the animals that survive the procedure. When an ape dies from the procedure, Victorine cuts the body up and removes it, a course of action similar to Poe's Telltale Heart, where an unnamed narrator murders an old man, cuts up his body, and buries the remains in the floorboards. Camille is now very interested. Meanwhile, after a night of hard partying, Leo awakens to find blood on his hands. He has no memory of the evening, and as he walks around the room, he finds his cat murdered, stabbed to death. He immediately sets out to find a replacement. This runs in parallel to Poe's The Black Cat, where the narrator, who is an alcoholic, horribly murders his cat and later finds a replacement that causes him much trouble. Poe's tale is quite different than this episode. After Dupin begins to investigate the scene of the murders, he uncovers some important facts. Clutched in Madame La Espinier's hand was some hair. The police believed it to be human. Dupin discovered that it was not human at all. It belonged to an orangutan. Dupin asserts that the police were so caught up in the emotion of the crime that they failed to notice the key details. The window was not locked. The nail the police found sealing it shut was defective. All they had to do was lift the window to see it wasn't holding anything. The voices they heard weren't voices at all. They were shrills. The shrills of an ape. Dupin then produces a sailor who had the animal as a pet. The ape stole his shaving razor and fled. The sailor could not keep up with the animal due to its physical superiority. This was proof enough to release Mr. Le Bon, saved by Dupin's rationality, or ratiocination, as Poe would have preferred. Poe may have found inspiration for the story in Sir Walter Scott's Count Robert of Paris in 1831, where in Chapter 5, the villainous philosopher Agalistes is strangled by Sylvan, an orangutan who makes strange, horse-like, unintelligible sounds, whom he had once hit with a staff. This crime remained unsolved, for Sylvan escaped and was returned to his owner. He also may have found influence in David Humphrey's poem The Monkey, a story of a monkey who imitated his owner's shaving and cut his own throat.
But you shouldn't be here. I know who you are. Of course I know who you are. You're the clever one. But you shouldn't be here. And you don't have to be here. That's all I was saying.
Open the door.
Camille, now certain she can catch Victorine red-handed, drives to the lab, called Rue Clinical Research, calling out Rue Morgue. She barges into the place, demanding the guard open the door. The guard, who is really Verna, tells Camille that she shouldn't be there. The guard has a name tag that says Le Bon, a nod to the innocent man accused of murder in Poe's version of the story. In a play on that innocence, Verna makes a case for the innocent animals that are experimented on for the sake of convenience products.
90% of drugs fail in human trials, even though they pass preclinical tests, so sorry, animals. And what about all the stuff that has nothing to do with health? I mean, You lot can't make a lipstick or a dandruff shampoo without making something suffer.
In a moment of irony, Verna becomes the ape, intimidating Camille. Her rage is now bent towards fear as Verna acts like Camille at last accepts her fate and takes a picture of Verna. The camera, never lying, reveals that Verna was the innocent primate victim of Victorine's sins. The animal lunges forward, mauling Camille to death in a fashion much like the victims of Poe's original tale. Well, that wraps up episode 3, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and puts in perspective many of the similarities and differences between the original story by Edgar Allan Poe and the Netflix rendition. Although this episode bears little resemblance to Poe's story, it does share some structural similarities and enough Poe references to keep you on your toes. What do you think? Which do you like better? Did you catch any Easter eggs we didn't talk about? Tune in when we break down and compare the next episode with the original text from Poe and point out more Easter eggs. Hint, there are many. Thanks for watching.